black man blocked from boarding plane. But when his true identity was revealed, the entire airport. The bustling Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport hummed with its usual frenetic energy on a crisp autumn morning. Travelers from all walks of life hurried through the vast terminals, their rolling suitcases creating a constant background rhythm against the polished floors. Among the crowd, moving with a calm, measured pace that contrasted sharply with the rush around him, was Dr. James Wilkinson. At 62, Dr. Wilkinson cut an impressive figure, tall and lean, with close-cropped silver hair and deep brown skin that spoke of a lifetime under the sun. His face, etched with lines of experience, held a quiet dignity that drew occasional glances from passers-by. As he approached the security checkpoint, Dr. Wilkinson couldn't help but feel a familiar tightening in his chest. Even after all these years, after all he had accomplished, these moments still brought back echoes of a past he could never quite shake. "Just another trip," he muttered to himself, adjusting the strap of his worn leather briefcase. Nothing to worry about. But worry he did. It was an old habit, born from years of experience that had taught him that for a man of his color, nothing was ever just routine. Dr. Wilkinson had been invited to speak at a prestigious medical conference in Boston. It was an honor he had earned through decades of groundbreaking research in cardiology, work that had saved countless lives and changed the face of heart surgery. Yet, as he stood in line, watching as security personnel ushered travelers through the metal detectors, he felt the weight of every one of his 62 years. His mind drifted back to his childhood in rural Georgia, to a time when airports like this were spaces he could only dream of entering. He remembered his father's words, spoken in a low, urgent tone. "Son, you've got to be twice as good to get half as far, but don't you ever let them see you sweat." Those words had been his mantra throughout medical school, through his residency at Johns Hopkins, and during the long nights of research that had led to his breakthrough. They echoed in his mind now as he inched closer to the security checkpoint. As Dr. Wilkinson began to empty his pockets and remove his shoes, commotion near the front of the line caught his attention. A young black man, probably in his early 20s, was engaged in a heated discussion with a TSA agent. "I'm telling you, I have a right to be here," the young man insisted, his voice rising with frustration. "Check my ticket, check my ID. Everything's in order." The TSA agent, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, shook her head. "Sir, please lower your voice. We have protocols we need to follow. If you can't comply, we'll have to ask you to step aside." Dr. Wilkinson felt a familiar ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his cardiac health. He had been in similar situations more times than he cared to remember. The constant suspicion, the extra scrutiny, the unspoken assumptions, they were burdens he had carried his entire life. For a moment, he considered stepping forward, using his status as a respected physician to intervene. But years of caution held him back. He knew all too well how quickly such situations could escalate, how easily a well-intentioned intervention could make things worse. As he watched, two more TSA agents approached, their hands resting meaningfully on their belts. The young man's voice rose another octave, panic now evident in his tone. "This isn't right. You can't do this. I have rights." Dr. Wilkinson closed his eyes briefly, memories washing over him. He saw himself as a young intern, being stopped and questioned in the hospital parking lot despite wearing his white coat and ID badge. He remembered the time he had been pulled over while driving to a medical conference, forced to sit on the curb while officers searched his car without cause. Opening his eyes, he saw that a small crowd had begun to gather, murmuring and pointing. Some had their phones out, recording the incident. The young man was now surrounded by TSA agents, his face a mask of fear and anger. In that moment, something shifted within Dr. Wilkinson. The caution of years began to give way to a different emotion, a sense of responsibility, of duty to the young man who was living through what he had experienced so many times before. Taking a deep breath, Dr. Wilkinson stepped out of line. He straightened his jacket, squared his shoulders, and began to walk towards the confrontation. As he moved, he felt the eyes of other travelers on him, some curious, some wary. "Excuse me," he said, his deep voice carrying easily over the noise of the airport. "I couldn't help but overhear. Is there a problem here?" The TSA agents turned to look at him, surprise evident on their faces. The young man, his eyes wide, seemed unsure whether to be relieved or more frightened by this new development. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," one of the agents said, his tone brusque. "Please return to your place in line." Dr. Wilkinson smiled, a gentle expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, as a fellow traveler and a citizen, I have a vested interest in ensuring that everyone's rights are respected in this airport." He turned to the young man, his voice softening. "Son, can you tell me what seems to be the issue here?" The young man swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the TSA agents before speaking. I was just trying to go through security. My flight's in an hour, but they're saying there's a problem with my ticket, that it looks suspicious. But I bought it legally, I swear." Dr. Wilkinson nodded, then turned back to the agents. "May I ask, what specifically about this young man's ticket appears suspicious?" The lead agent, a balding man with a perpetual frown, stepped forward. "Sir, as I said, this is a matter of airport security. We have procedures we need to follow. If you continue to interfere, we'll have to ask you to leave as well." Dr. Wilkinson felt a familiar surge of anger, quickly suppressed. He had faced such thinly veiled threats before, but he was no longer the young intern or the newly minted doctor. He was Dr. James Wilkinson, respected cardiologist, invited speaker at international conferences. He had earned the right to stand his ground. "I understand you have procedures," he said calmly. "But I also understand that those procedures must be applied equally and fairly to all travelers. From what I can see, this young man has been singled out for extra scrutiny. I'd like to know on what grounds." As he spoke, Dr. Wilkinson was acutely aware of the growing crowd around them. Phones were out, recording the confrontation. In the back of his mind, he knew this could easily spiral out of control. But he also knew that sometimes, standing up for what was right meant taking risks. The young man, emboldened by Dr. Wilkinson's support, spoke up again. "I'm a student at Morehouse College. I'm flying to New York for a family emergency. My grandmother is in the hospital. Please, I can't miss this flight." Dr. Wilkinson felt a pang in his heart. He too had been a student at Morehouse many years ago. Coincidence strengthened his resolve. "Agents," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in the operating room. "I believe we have a simple misunderstanding here. This young man is clearly distressed and in a hurry due to a family emergency. Surely we can resolve this quickly and allow him to catch his flight?" The agents exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed. The crowd of onlookers had grown, and murmurs of discontent were beginning to ripple through it. Just as the tension seemed about to reach a breaking point, a new voice cut through the noise. "What seems to be the problem here?" Dr. Wilkinson turned to see an older white man in a suit approaching, flanked by two airport security officers. From his bearing and the respectful way the TSA agents reacted to his presence, it was clear this was someone in a position of authority. As the man drew closer, Dr. Wilkinson steeled himself for what he feared would be another confrontation. But he had come too far to back down now. Whatever happened next, he knew he had to see this through. For the young student, for himself, and for all those who had faced similar situations without anyone to stand up for them. Little did Dr. Wilkinson know that his decision to intervene was about to set in motion a chain of events that would not only change his life, spark a national conversation about racial profiling, respect, and the true meaning of identity in America. The bustling Atlanta airport was about to become the stage for a drama that would capture the attention of millions and force the country to confront some uncomfortable truths about prejudice, preconceptions. As he stood there, his heart racing, but his exterior calm, Dr. James Wilkinson was unaware that he was on the brink of becoming a reluctant hero, a symbol of dignity and courage in the face of injustice. The next few hours would test everything he had learned in his long and distinguished career, bringing him face to face with challenges he never expected to encounter in the autumn of his life. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the eyes of the world were about to turn to Gate 27 of Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, where an ordinary day was about to become extraordinary. The arrival of the man in the suit seemed to shift the energy of the entire scene. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone used to being in charge, his keen eyes taking in the situation with a practiced glance. "I'm Richard Hawthorne, Airport Operations Manager," he announced, his voice carrying a hint of a southern drawl. "Now, can someone please explain to me what's going on here?" Before any of the TSA agents could respond, Dr. Wilkinson stepped forward, his posture straight and dignified. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm Dr. James Wilkinson. It appears we have a situation where this young man," he gestured to the student, "is being unfairly targeted for additional screening without clear justification." Hawthorne's eyebrows rose slightly at Dr. Wilkinson's professional tone. He turned to the lead TSA agent. "Is this true, Johnson?" The agent, looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Sir, we received an alert about a suspicious ticket purchase. We're just following protocol." "And what exactly makes this ticket suspicious?" Dr. Wilkinson pressed, his voice level but insistent. The young student, who had been watching this exchange with a mixture of hope and trepidation, spoke up. "Sir, I can explain. I bought this ticket late last night after I got a call that my grandmother was rushed to the hospital. I used my emergency credit card. I've never flown before, so maybe I did something wrong, but I swear, everything is legitimate." Hawthorne nodded thoughtfully, then turned to the TSA agents. "Have you verified his ID and ticket?" "Well, yes," the lead agent admitted reluctantly. "They do match and seem to be in order, but the system flagged." "The system," Dr. Wilkinson interrupted, unable to contain himself any longer. "Or your own biases?" A hush fell over the gathered crowd. Even the constant background noise of the airport seemed to dim for a moment as the weight of Dr. Wilkinson's words sank in. Hawthorne's expression tightened. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Wilkinson." "It is," Dr. Wilkinson agreed, his voice firm, "and one I don't make lightly. But I've seen this scenario play out too many times in my life. A young black man, traveling alone, flagged as suspicious for doing nothing more than trying to reach his family in an emergency." The young student nodded vigorously. "It's true, sir. I've done nothing wrong. I just need to get to my grandmother, please." Hawthorne looked between Dr. Wilkinson and the student, then back to the TSA agents. His next words were measured, careful. "Johnson, if the young man's documents are in order, on what grounds are you detaining him?" TSA agent shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, it's just that the ticket was purchased so recently, and the travel pattern seemed unusual." "Unusual?" Dr. Wilkinson couldn't help but interject. "Or just unusual for someone who looks like him." Crowd, which had been growing steadily, began to murmur more loudly. Phones were still out, recording every moment of the confrontation. Dr. Wilkinson was acutely aware that this incident was likely already spreading across social media. Hawthorne held up a hand, calling for silence. "All right, let's all take a breath here. Dr. Wilkinson, I appreciate your concern for this young man. And young man, what's your name?" "Marcus, sir. Marcus Thompson." "Marcus, I understand you're in a difficult situation. Now let's see if we can resolve this calmly and quickly." As Hawthorne began to review Marcus's documents personally, Dr. Wilkinson felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see an elderly white woman, her face creased with concern. "Excuse me, doctor," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, well, thank you for speaking up. It's not right what they're doing to that boy." Dr. Wilkinson nodded, touched by the woman's words. As he looked around, he realized that many in the crowd were nodding in agreement. The atmosphere had shifted. What had started as a confrontation was becoming a moment of collective witness. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "James? James Wilkinson, is that you?" Dr. Wilkinson turned, surprise etched on his face, to see a man in a military uniform pushing through the crowd. As the man got closer, recognition dawned. "Colonel Roberts?" Dr. Wilkinson said, incredulous. The man, a distinguished-looking white officer in his late 50s, broke into a wide grin. "I thought that was you. What on earth is going on here?" Before Dr. Wilkinson could respond, Hawthorne stepped forward. "Excuse me, but who are you, sir?" The colonel straightened, his bearing immediately official. "Colonel Michael Roberts, United States Air Force. I'm the liaison officer for military affairs at this airport. And this man," he said, clapping Dr. Wilkinson on the shoulder, "saved my life." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Even the TSA agents looked taken aback. "It's true," Colonel Roberts continued. 10 years ago, I was rushed to Emory University Hospital with what turned out to be a massive heart attack. Dr. Wilkinson here performed emergency surgery. The other doctors said it was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, but he pulled me through. Dr. Wilkinson, normally so composed, felt a flush of embarrassment. Michael, please. I was just doing my job. Your job. Colonel Roberts laughed. James, you're being modest. This man isn't just a doctor, Mr. Hawthorne. He's a pioneer in cardiothoracic surgery. He's developed techniques that are used in hospitals all over the world. He's saved countless lives, including mine. The revelation seemed to stun everyone into silence. Hawthorne looked from Colonel Roberts to Dr. Wilkinson, his expression a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Dr. Wilkinson, he said slowly, I had no idea. I apologize for any, hey. But Dr. Wilkinson held up a hand, stopping him. Mr. Hawthorne, while I appreciate the recognition, that's not why I'm here. I'm here because a young man is being unfairly treated, and that's something I cannot stand by and watch. He turned to Marcus, who was staring at him with wide-eyed admiration. Marcus, your grandmother is waiting for you. Let's make sure you get on that plane. Hawthorne, seeming to snap out of his daze, nodded briskly. Course, Johnson, escort Mr. Poina Thompson through security immediately, and I want a full report on why he was flagged in the first place. As Marcus was finally ushered through the security checkpoint, the crowd began to applaud. Dr. Wilkinson felt a swell of emotion in his chest. Pride, yes, but also a deep sadness that such an intervention had been necessary at all. Colonel Roberts leaned in close. James, you do realize this isn't over, don't you? This whole thing has probably gone viral by now. Dr. Wilkinson sighed, suddenly feeling every one of his 62 years. I know, Michael. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. As the crowd began to disperse and Dr. Wilkinson prepared to go through security himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was just the beginning of something much larger. He had spent his career saving lives in the operating room, but perhaps now he was being called to a different kind of service. Little did he know that in the hours and days to come, his actions at Gate 27 would spark a national conversation about race, identity, and what it truly means to be a hero. The video of the confrontation was already spreading across social media platforms, and news outlets were scrambling to identify the dignified black doctor who had stood up to airport security. As Dr. James Wilkinson finally made his way to his gate, his mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired, he was unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The respect and admiration he had earned through decades of medical service were about to be put to a test far removed from the operating theater. The story of what happened at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was just beginning to unfold, and Dr. Wilkinson, reluctant as he might be, was now at the very heart of it. By the time Dr. James Wilkinson settled into his seat on the flight to Boston, the video of the incident at the security checkpoint had already gone viral. Unbeknownst to him, hashtags like Dr. Wilkinson Stands Up and Respect at Gate 27 were trending on social media platforms. As the plane taxied down the runway, Dr. Wilkinson's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. He had switched it to silent mode, preferring to gather his thoughts before engaging with the outside world. The events of the morning played on repeat in his mind, a mixture of pride in standing up for what was right and anxiety about the potential consequences. Beside him, a middle-aged woman was furiously typing on her tablet. She paused, glanced at Dr. Wilkinson, then did a double take. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tinged with excitement, "but aren't you the doctor from the airport video?" Dr. Wilkinson sighed inwardly but maintained his composure. "Yes, that was me," he admitted. The woman's eyes lit up. "I just want to say what you did was incredible. My daughter sent me the video. It's all over Facebook." As the woman continued to gush, Dr. Wilkinson felt a growing unease. He had never sought the spotlight, preferring to let his work speak for itself. Now it seemed he had been thrust into a very public role he wasn't sure he was prepared for. The 3-hour flight to Boston felt interminable. More passengers recognized him, some offering words of support, others asking for selfies, which he politely declined. By the time the plane touched down at Logan International Airport, Dr. Wilkinson was exhausted. As he made his way through the terminal, He was surprised to see a small group of reporters waiting near the exit. How had they known he would be on this flight? "Dr. Wilkinson," one of them called out, microphone extended. "Can you comment on the incident at Atlanta Airport this morning?" Another chimed in. "Do you believe racial profiling is a systemic issue in airport security?" Dr. Wilkinson held up a hand, his expression firm but polite. "I appreciate your interest, but I have no comment at this time. If you'll excuse me, I have a conference to attend." As he pushed through the crowd, he felt a hand on his arm. Turning, he saw a young black woman in a crisp suit, her expression earnest. "Dr. Wilkinson, I'm Aisha Johnson from the NAACP. We'd like to speak with you about what happened today. Your actions have the potential to spark real change." Dr. Wilkinson paused, considering. He had been a longtime supporter of the NAACP, believing deeply in their mission. But he was also acutely aware of the complexity of the situation he now found himself in. "Miss Johnson," he said carefully, "I appreciate the NAACP's interest, but I need some time to process what's happened. Perhaps we could speak later?" Aisha nodded, handing him her card. "Of course, Dr. Wilkinson. Please, call me anytime." As he finally made it to his hotel, Dr. Wilkinson allowed himself to check his phone. The barrage of messages, missed calls, and social media notifications was overwhelming. Colleagues from around the world had reached out, some offering support, others expressing concern about the potential backlash. One message, however, caught his eye. It was from Marcus Thompson, the young man from the airport. "Dr. Wilkinson, I don't know how to thank you enough. I made it to New York in time to see my grandmother. The doctors say your intervention may have saved her life. The stress of me not being there could have been devastating in her condition. You're a hero, sir, in more ways than one." Attached to the message was a photo of Marcus holding the hand of an elderly woman in a hospital bed, both of them smiling through tears. Dr. Wilkinson felt a lump form in his throat. This, he realized, was why he had acted. Not for recognition or praise, but because it was the right thing to do. As he prepared for the conference, Dr. Wilkinson's phone rang. Caller ID showed it was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the organizer of the medical conference and an old friend. "James," Elena said as soon as he answered, her voice a mixture of concern and excitement. "I assume you've seen the news?" "I've been trying to avoid it, actually," Dr. Wilkinson admitted. "Well, I hate to add to your stress, but I need to ask you something. We've had an overwhelming number of requests from attendees. They want you to address what happened today during your keynote speech." Dr. Wilkinson felt a flutter of panic. His keynote was supposed to be about recent advancements in minimally invasive cardiac surgery. He wasn't prepared to speak about racial profiling or civil rights. "Elena, I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm not an expert on these issues. I'm just a doctor who stood up for what's right," Elena interrupted. "James, you've always said that being a doctor is about more than just treating physical ailments. It's about standing up for the well-being of all people. This is your chance to do that on a larger scale." As they continued to talk, Dr. Wilkinson felt a shift within himself. He thought about Marcus and his grandmother, about the countless other individuals who face discrimination every day. He thought about his own journey, the obstacles he'd overcome, the mentors who had stood up for him. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do it, but I'll need some time to prepare." The next morning, as Dr. Wilkinson stood at the podium facing a packed auditorium, he felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he had before a complex surgery, clarity of purpose, a knowledge that what he was about to do mattered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep-voiced voice resonating through the hall, "I came here today prepared to talk about advancements in cardiac surgery, and we will get to that. But first, I want to talk about a different kind of heart condition, one that affects not just individuals, but our entire society." As he spoke about his experience at the airport, about the broader implications of racial profiling, and about the responsibility of all professionals to stand up against injustice, Dr. Wilkinson could see the impact his words were having. Some in the audience nodded in agreement, others looked uncomfortable, but all were listening intently. "As doctors," he concluded, "we take an oath to do no harm. But I believe our responsibility goes further than that. We have an obligation to actively do good, to heal, not just bodies, the rifts in our society. What happened at that airport was a symptom of a deeper illness in our nation. And like any illness, requires diagnosis, treatment, and ongoing care to cure. The applause that followed was thunderous. As Dr. Wilkinson stepped away from the podium, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had spoken his truth, and in doing so, had opened a door to a conversation that was long overdue. Little did he know that his words were being live-streamed beyond the conference hall. Clips of his speech were already circulating online, being shared by influencers, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. The story of Dr. James Wilkinson, the renowned cardiac surgeon who stood up against racial profiling, was no longer just a viral video. It was becoming a movement, rallying cry for change, as he made his way back to his seat, accepting handshakes and words of support from colleagues. Dr. Wilkinson realized that his life had irrevocably changed. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril, but he was ready to walk it, guided by the same principles that had directed his entire career: compassion, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The conference hall buzzed with excitement and debate, a microcosm of the larger conversation that was spreading across the nation. And at the center of it all was Dr. James Wilkinson, a man who had set out to save hearts in the operating room, and now found himself working to change hearts and minds on a scale he had never imagined. In the days following the medical conference, Dr. James Wilkinson found himself at the center of a media whirlwind. His inbox was flooded with interview requests from major news networks, talk shows, and podcasts. His phone rang constantly, calls from journalists, activists, and even politicians seeking his input on issues of racial equality and social justice. At first, Dr. Wilkinson was overwhelmed by the attention. He had spent his career focused on saving lives in the operating room, not navigating the complexities of public discourse on race relations. But as the days passed, he began to see this unexpected platform as an opportunity, a chance to effect change on a scale he had never before imagined. With the help of Aisha Johnson from the NAACP, who had become something of an unofficial advisor, Dr. Wilkinson carefully selected which media appearances to accept. He was determined to use his newfound influence responsibly, to elevate the conversation beyond his personal experience to address systemic issues. One crisp morning, a week after the airport incident, Dr. Wilkinson found himself in a New York television studio, preparing for an appearance on a popular morning show. As the makeup artist applied a light powder to his face, he tried to calm his nerves by running through the talking points he and Aisha had prepared. "Dr. Wilkinson, we're on in 2 minutes," a young production assistant called out. As he was led to the set, Dr. Wilkinson's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus Thompson. "Watching from the hospital with Grandma. You've got this, Doc." The message brought a smile to Dr. Wilkinson's face and steadied his resolve. This was why he was doing this. For Marcus, all the young people who deserved a fair chance in life. "Welcome back," the host's voice rang out as the cameras began rolling. "We're here with Dr. James Wilkinson, the renowned cardiac surgeon whose stand against racial profiling at Atlanta Airport has sparked a national conversation. Dr. Wilkinson, thank you for joining us." "Thank you for having me," Dr. Wilkinson replied, his deep voice calm and measured. "Dr. Wilkinson, your actions at the airport and your subsequent speech at the medical conference have resonated with millions of Americans. Did you ever imagine your intervention would have such a far-reaching impact?" Dr. Wilkinson shook his head. "Not at all. In that moment, I was simply doing what I felt was right. I saw a young man being unfairly treated, and I couldn't stand by silently. As a doctor, my instinct is to help those in need, whether that's in the operating room or at an airport security checkpoint." The interview continued, touching on Dr. Wilkinson's personal experiences with discrimination, his thoughts on systemic racism in various institutions, and his hopes for positive change. Throughout, he maintained his dignified demeanor, speaking with the same careful precision he used in surgery. "Dr. Wilkinson," the host said as the interview was wrapping up, "you've become something of a reluctant hero to many. What message do you have for those who are inspired by your action?" Dr. Wilkinson paused, considering his words carefully. "I would say this. Each of us has the power to make a difference. It doesn't require grand gestures or public recognition. It simply requires the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. Change happens one interaction at a time, one person at a time. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society. As the cameras stopped rolling, Dr. Wilkinson let out a long breath. He had done countless interviews in his professional capacity before, but never anything like this. The weight of his words, potential impact they might have, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Wilkinson's schedule became a delicate balance between his medical duties and his new role as a public figure. He insisted on maintaining his surgical practice, unwilling to abandon the patients who relied on him. But his evenings and weekends were filled with speaking engagements, meetings with civil rights organizations, and continued media appearances. The response to his message was overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from people all over the country, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and expressing gratitude for his willingness to speak out. Many were from fellow medical professionals, inspired to examine and address issues of bias in their own practices. But with the positive attention came challenges. Dr. Wilkinson received threats from those who saw his actions as an attack on law enforcement or airport security. Some colleagues, uncomfortable with the spotlight he had brought to issues of race in medicine, distanced themselves from him. Through it all, Dr. Wilkinson remained grounded by his commitment to his patients and his principles. He found strength in unexpected places, the unwavering support of his hospital administration, the pride in the eyes of young medical students who now saw him as a role model, the continued messages of encouragement from Marcus and his grandmother. One afternoon, as Dr. Wilkinson was preparing for a surgery, he received a call that would once again change the trajectory of his journey. It was from the office of a prominent senator, inviting him to testify before a congressional committee on racial profiling and its impacts on public safety and civil liberties. As he considered the invitation, Dr. Wilkinson reflected on how far this journey had taken him from his comfort zone. He was a surgeon, not a politician or a policy expert. But he also recognized the rare opportunity this presented to influence policy at the highest levels. After consulting with Aisha and his closest colleagues, Dr. Wilkinson agreed to testify. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation, poring over statistics, consulting with experts in civil rights law, and refining his testimony to strike the right balance between personal experience and broader societal implications. The day of the hearing arrived, and Dr. Wilkinson found himself seated before a panel of senators, cameras broadcasting the proceedings to millions of homes across the nation. As he began to speak, he felt the weight of all the stories he carried with him. Own, Marcus's, and those of the countless individuals who had reached out to him over the past week. Distinguished senators, he began, his voice steady and resolute. I come before you not just as Dr. James Wilkinson, cardiac surgeon, but as a representative of every person who has ever felt the sting of unwarranted suspicion based solely on the color of their skin. What happened to me at Atlanta Airport was not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a deeper, systemic issue that affects millions of Americans every day. As Dr. Wilkinson continued his testimony, laying out both personal anecdotes and hard data, he could see the impact his words were having on the committee members. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uncomfortable, but all were listening intently. In that moment, Dr. James Wilkinson realized that his journey had come full circle. From the young boy in rural Georgia who dreamed of becoming a doctor, to the renowned surgeon who had saved countless lives, to this, a voice for change at the highest levels of government. He had spent his career healing hearts one patient at a time. Now, he was working to heal the heart of a nation. As the hearing concluded and Dr. Wilkinson stepped down from the witness stand, he felt a profound sense of purpose. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges he could only begin to imagine. But he was ready to face them, armed with the same determination and compassion that had guided him throughout his medical career. The story of Dr. James Wilkinson, which had begun with a simple act of standing up for what was right, had become a catalyst for a national reckoning on race identity, and justice. As he walked out of the congressional chamber, surrounded by a flurry of reporters and well-wishers, Dr. 1 year had passed since that fateful day at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Dr. James Wilkinson stood at the podium in a grand ballroom, the eyes of hundreds of attendees fixed upon him. The occasion was the annual gala of the newly established Wilkinson Foundation for Equality in Healthcare and Society. As Dr. Wilkinson surveyed the diverse crowd before him, medical professionals, civil rights activists, politicians, and community leaders, he marveled at the journey that had brought him to this moment. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying the weight of experience and the hope of future change, "I was simply a doctor on my way to a conference. I could never have imagined the path that lay ahead. But as I've often told my students, life's most important surgeries are the ones we don't plan for." A gentle laugh rippled through the audience. The incident at the airport opened my eyes to the power we all have to effect change. It reminded me that our duty to heal extends beyond the walls of our hospitals and clinics. We must also work to heal the societal ailments that plague our communities: discrimination, inequality, and injustice. Over the past year, Dr. Wilkinson had become more than just a viral sensation or a momentary symbol. He had transformed into a leading voice in the ongoing national conversation about race and equality. His testimony before Congress had led to the introduction of new legislation aimed at reducing racial profiling in law enforcement and transportation security. But perhaps more significantly, Dr. Wilkinson had used his platform to shine a light on disparities in healthcare access and outcomes for minority communities. His foundation was now funding research, providing scholarships for minority medical students, and working with hospitals across the country to implement bias training and equitable care initiatives. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished," Dr. Wilkinson continued, "but our work is far from over. The changes we seek, in our institutions, in our communities, and in our hearts, don't happen overnight. They require ongoing commitment, education, and most importantly, action." As he spoke, Dr. Wilkinson's mind drifted to some of the key moments from the past year. He remembered the day he returned to Atlanta Airport, not as a passenger, as a consultant. He had worked with airport management and TSA officials to develop new training programs focused on eliminating bias in security procedures. The same TSA agent who had confronted Marcus was now one of the program's most enthusiastic supporters. He thought about the series of town hall meetings he had conducted across the country, bringing together law enforcement, community leaders, and citizens to have honest, often difficult conversations about race and policing. These dialogues had led to the implementation of new community policing initiatives in several cities. He recalled the emotional moment when he had been invited back to Morehouse College, his alma mater, to deliver the commencement address. Looking out at the sea of young black faces, full of hope and potential, he had felt a renewed sense of purpose and responsibility. But perhaps the memory that stood out most was a quiet dinner he had shared with Marcus Thompson and his grandmother in New York. Marcus, inspired by Dr. Wilkinson's example, had decided to pursue a career in medicine. His grandmother, fully recovered, had tears in her eyes as she thanked Dr. Wilkinson, not just for his intervention at the airport, but for showing her grandson what was possible when one stood up for what was right. Bringing his attention back to the present, Dr. Wilkinson concluded his speech. "As we move forward, let us remember that change begins with each one of us. In our daily interactions, in our professional lives, and in our communities, we have the power to stand up against injustice and to foster understanding. Let us have the courage to be that change, be the healers our society so desperately needs." The applause that followed was thunderous, but for Dr. Wilkinson, the most meaningful response came after the gala had ended. As he was preparing to leave, a young black woman in medical scrubs approached him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Dr. Wilkinson," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I just finished my shift at the hospital and rushed over here. I wanted you to know. I became a doctor because of you. Not just because of what happened at the airport, but because of everything you've done since. You showed me that I could make a difference, both in and out of the operating room." Deeply moved, Dr. Wilkinson embraced the young doctor. In that moment, he saw the true impact of his actions, not in the headlines or policy changes, but in the lives of individuals inspired to carry the torch forward. As he left the gala and stepped into the cool night air, Dr. James Wilkinson felt a profound sense of peace. The past year had been challenging, often exhausting, but incredibly rewarding. He had discovered a new purpose, a way to combine his medical expertise with his passion for social justice. Looking up at the starry sky, Dr. Wilkinson thought about the long arc of his life. From a young boy in segregated Georgia who dared to dream of becoming a doctor, to a renowned surgeon who had saved countless lives, to now, a voice for change and equality on a national stage. He thought about all the people who had supported him along the way, his parents who had sacrificed so much, his mentors who had guided him, his colleagues who had stood by him, and now a new generation looking to him for inspiration. The journey ahead was still long, the challenges still significant, but as Dr. James Wilkinson walked towards his car, felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. He had spent his career healing hearts, one patient at a time. Now in the autumn, and as he drove home, the city lights twinkling around him, Dr. Wilkinson smiled. The simple act of standing up for what was right at an airport security checkpoint had set in motion a chain of events that was changing lives and shaping policies. It was a powerful reminder that no act of courage, no matter how small it might seem in the moment, was ever wasted. The story of Dr. James Wilkinson, surgeon, advocate, and reluctant hero, had become more than just a viral video or a fleeting news story. It had become a testament, the enduring power of dignity, compassion, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. And in that story, countless others were now finding the courage to write their own chapters of change. As he pulled into his driveway, Dr. Wilkinson felt not the weariness of his years, but the excitement of new possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. And he was ready to meet them, armed with a lifetime of experience and the knowledge that true healing extended far beyond the walls of any hospital. The porch light welcomed him home, beacon in the night. And as Dr. James Wilkinson stepped inside, he knew that his greatest work, the work of healing a nation's divisions, fostering a more just society, was only just beginning.